The story begins with a surgeon named Laura. Dr. Laura was an independent, successful plastic surgeon who ran her own clinic. Laura was observing her patients when a male nurse, Gustavo, comes in without knocking and gives Laura an important file and goes towards the patient without looking at her. Later, Laura meets Gustavo, where we learn that Gustavo wanted to become a doctor and he was in his first year. Laura asks Gustavo if he is gay because he didn't look at Laura's lady patient. Gustavo tells her that her patient wasn't of Gustavo's type and tells her that he likes an independent lady like Laura. Hearing this, Laura gets a little impressed. In the evening, Laura was with her friend Eduardo, where she tells Eduardo to marry because he looked aged. Eduardo replies that there is a girl, but she is not ready to get married. Actually, Eduardo had proposed to Laura during her college days, but because of her career, Laura didn't accept Eduardo's proposal. The next day, when Laura was with her patient, Gustavo comes to her. Laura's patient was Gustavo's friend who starts talking to Gustavo, and Laura gets jealous. Later, Laura asks her patient about Gustavo, and the patient tells her that Gustavo was her neighbor. When Laura was going home at night, Gustavo was also going with her. On the way, Gustavo asks Laura when she graduated. Laura replies that you are asking this to know my age, but Gustavo says that he wants to start a clinic like her. Laura says that it takes a lot of time, hard work, and sacrifices. In response, Gustavo says that he can do anything to achieve his goal, which makes Laura very happy. The next day was Laura's birthday. Gustavo also gives her roses and asks her for dinner. But Laura's plan had already been made with Eduardo, so Gustavo also agrees for another day. But later, Laura gets a call from Eduardo, who wishes her and tells her that he can't meet her at night. When Gustavo comes to Laura, Laura says that she will go with him for dinner. When they meet in the evening, Gustavo tells her about his grandma, that he misses her a lot. Laura asks about Gustavo's girlfriend. Gustavo says that he likes a mature lady. Later, when Gustavo asks about Laura's relationship, Laura changes the topic. Later, when they were on the way, Gustavo asks about some books, and after a while, he reaches Laura's house, and Gustavo asks her to come inside. Gustavo says that he wants to share some romantic moments with her, and while saying this, he kisses Laura. But Laura stops him, and Gustavo says sorry and leaves. But at night, Laura was thinking about Gustavo. The next day, a patient named Rosario comes to Laura for a face surgery. She was Laura's old patient who didn't pay for the first surgery. So Laura refuses her and goes to her office. Then Gustavo comes and apologizes for the night, and Laura tells him to forget everything. Gustavo was leaving from there, and then Rosario comes to Laura again, and after a while, she puts a knife around Laura's neck and threatens her and asks her for money. Here, Gustavo tries to make Rosario understand, and he succeeds. And Laura hugs Gustavo. In the evening, Eduardo comes to Laura's house and gives her some photos as a gift. Laura likes him a lot, but then Eduardo asks about the roses there. Then Laura says that a 20-year-old nurse gave her those roses who is studying now. Here, Eduardo says that 20-year-old boys do all this for only one thing. Laura says that she has no problem with a 20-year-old boy. Eduardo himself loved Laura, so he advises Laura not to live with Gustavo. But Laura doesn't listen. Before going to bed, Laura calls Gustavo and asks him to give her books. Gustavo also brings a music CD for Laura as a gift, which Laura liked a lot. Laura can't handle herself here and kisses Gustavo and takes him upstairs where they both start playing games. The next day when they were on duty, Gustavo starts being romantic with Laura and they both start playing games in the office. In the evening, Gustavo goes to Laura's house where he meets Eduardo, who makes Gustavo jealous. After Eduardo leaves, they start arguing. Laura tries to make Gustavo understand, but Gustavo pushes her in anger. Laura also gets angry and tells him clearly that if he wants to live with Laura, he will have to accept Laura's environment. After a while, Gustavo apologizes to Laura, and they both become close again. Meanwhile, Gustavo asks her to marry him, but Laura says that she hasn't thought about it yet. With this, Laura tells Gustavo about her past, that she got pregnant during the course, and Eduardo proposed to her. But Laura didn't want to be a housewife, so she rejected Eduardo's proposal and got an abortion. Gustavo wanted to spend more time with Laura and stay with her, but Laura wasn't ready for this. When Laura was in the office in the morning, her neighbors called, and Laura went to her house and saw that Gustavo had shifted her stuff to Laura's house. Seeing this, Laura tells Gustavo to take everything back, but Gustavo says that his landlord has vacated his house and now he doesn't have a place to stay. Hearing this, Laura agrees, but she says that he won't do anything without her permission. One late night, Laura wakes up and sees Gustavo singing lullabies outside. When Laura asks him, Gustavo says that he was waiting for his grandma. Laura gets very worried and calls Eduardo and tells him everything. Eduardo tells her that Gustavo is used to walking in his sleep and that she shouldn't worry. She asks him all this in the morning. When Gustavo was sitting in the morning, Laura asks him about his last night and also asks him if he hurt himself while walking in his sleep. But Gustavo comes in a romantic mood and takes Laura to his room. When Laura was in the clinic, she asks Rosario about his health. She says that she saw Gustavo last night. When Laura goes home in the evening, Gustavo was preparing for dinner. But then Laura sees that Eduardo's paintings weren't on the wall. Laura asks Gustavo. Gustavo says that those paintings were scary, and his grandma told him to stay away from such things. Hearing this, Laura gets very angry and says that she is going to meet Eduardo. The paintings should be there by the time she comes. When Laura comes back, she sees that Gustavo has put those paintings there. Gustavo says that you were with Eduardo. Laura says that she doesn't want to argue. Saying this, she goes to take a shower. Gustavo also reaches there and both of them get close. The next morning, Laura was with Eduardo. She says that she finds Gustavo very strange, but she doesn't want to lose him. Eduardo says that you are not alone. Your old friend is with you. In the evening, when Laura was ready for dinner, Gustavo sees her dress and tells her to change it. Eduardo must have given it to you. But Laura wears this dress to look young. But Gustavo says in anger that Laura should wear the same clothes that she used to wear. Otherwise, they won't go for dinner. Here, Laura also gets angry. She says that you can't decide what to wear and what not to wear. No one else will decide that. Also, she asks Gustavo to leave the house. And she goes to her room. Gustavo also comes there and tells Laura that she can't throw him out of the house. Laura says that he has troubled Laura from the beginning. That's when Gustavo comes close to Laura to convince her. But this time, Laura wasn't ready to agree. She says that understanding in relationships is very important. Physical relation isn't everything, and Gustavo doesn't listen to Laura. In fact, he starts forcing her. Laura tries to escape a lot, but Gustavo tries to harass Laura. Somehow, Laura escapes from Gustavo and goes to the kitchen to get a knife. Gustavo also reaches there. Laura says that if he doesn't go, she will call the police. That's when Gustavo leaves. Laura tells Eduardo about all this. Eduardo asks her to complain, but Laura didn't want to complain. She was afraid that the matter might escalate. Eduardo asks if he has done such things for the first time. Laura says that he used to be violent and physical, but Laura never thought of it. Eduardo asks her to stay with him to take care of her, because he was worried about Laura. When Laura was in the clinic, she tells her assistant that when Gustavo comes, tell him that he has been thrown out of the clinic. But the assistant says that Gustavo left from here and left a letter. It said that he doesn't dare to see Laura's face anymore. Laura will never forgive him for what he did that night. On the other hand, Eduardo came home from his job. But when Eduardo was in the parking lot, Gustavo attacked him. Gustavo's face was covered, but Eduardo recognized him with Gustavo's bracelet. When Laura finds out about Eduardo, she goes to Eduardo. Eduardo tells Laura that Gustavo did all this because Gustavo is jealous of him. I saw that bracelet in his hand. That's when Laura tells him that Gustavo has apologized and left, and there's no point in complaining. But Eduardo still doubts Gustavo. He says that Laura is making a mistake by trusting Gustavo again. Gustavo can come into her life and trouble her again, but Laura doesn't believe it, and she says that if he complains against Gustavo without any proof, she won't talk to him. When Laura was at home, she checks Gustavo's belongings. She finds Gustavo's photo of her in the shower and some drawings in a book. Now, Laura wanted to know Gustavo's past. She goes to Gustavo's neighbor, who was Laura's patient, and asks her about Gustavo. The patient says that Gustavo didn't have a grandmother. In fact, that woman was a friend of Gustavo's parents. After Gustavo's parents' death, that woman adopted Gustavo, and later they started living together like husband and wife. When the neighbors found out about this, the woman fled to Spain, and since then, Gustavo has been living alone. Later, when Laura reaches home, she sees that the same opera was going on which Gustavo gave to Laura. Laura sees that there was a threat on the mirror. Laura gets very scared. She calls Eduardo. Eduardo calls the police. Laura gets scared and says that Gustavo is dangerous and that he can do anything. Eduardo takes care of her and says that he has a gun. If he comes, he will shoot her. The next morning, when Laura was performing a surgery, the patient suddenly falls ill. Then, Laura gets scared and comes out of the operation theater. Later, her assistant comes and tells her that this happened because the anesthesia machine broke. At the same time, Laura meets Eduardo and tells him that because the anesthesia machine broke, the patient was about to die. His husband filed a case against her. Then Eduardo asks Laura to take a few days off. At midnight, Eduardo tells her that Gustavo has been caught. Hearing this, Laura breathes a sigh of relief and agrees to go on vacation. In the morning, when they were getting ready, Gustavo comes there and tries to kill Eduardo. Suddenly the bell rings. Eduardo, also seeing a chance, and locks himself in the room. The police had come outside. Gustavo finds out about this, but after a while the police also leave. Gustavo goes to Laura. Laura was looking at her patient. After a while, the bandage was about to come off from that patient. Laura goes out for a while, but when she comes back, Gustavo comes there instead of the patient. Laura somehow manages to escape. She sees that Gustavo had killed her staff as well, and Gustavo catches Laura as well. Gustavo wanted to give Laura his grandmother's face, and he was cutting Laura's face with a blade. Then Eduardo comes there and shoots him. And finally, Eduardo and Laura become one. And this is where the story ends. So friends, that's all in today's video. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I will meet you in the next video. Till then, peace out.